The Stamina Necromancer has hands down been the most popular stamina class for PvE since it was first released nearly 2 years ago. There have been several reasons for this, including its ultimates, its array of strong passives, as well as reliable single target and AoE damage. It's basically the perfect class. For the upcoming months, the Stamina Necromancer will still be right up there, and I'm hoping that this video will showcase its potential to you. Hi, this is Liko, and welcome to my Stamina Necromancer PVE Build and Rotation video for the Flames of Ambition DLC. Here, you see my Stamina Necromancer in Sunspire claiming the first ever Godslayer achievement. I was one of 6 Stamina Necromancers in the team that day. You can find Stamina Necromancer gameplay like this from myself and many others most reliably on liko.gg. Moving on, today we showcase 3 different really powerful setups for the Stamina Necromancer. We have a double dual wield build, followed by a 2-hander dual wield build, and then we finish off with a Babu build. Thanks to Extrawell, who goes by the name Luca, who has kindly provided the footage for us today. If you're interested in another great source of PvE builds and gameplay, then Luca's channel certainly is worth checking out. He also has a bunch of really great high-level PvP content as well, so there's plenty of variety for you there. I've left a link to Luca's channel in the description below. Okay, so let's get started with the choice of race, Mundus Stone and food. If you're already comfortable with your choices here, then do feel free to skip ahead to the next section. I've left timestamps in the video description to help you get around a little more easily. So for the choice of race, Orc used to be the flat out best for stamina DPS, but this is no longer the case. From now I will recommend either Khajiit or Dunmer as your very top choices. It's a toss up between the two, so honestly go with whichever you prefer out of those. However, having said, Orc really isn't too far behind. It still has some other very useful perks, so if you're currently an Orc, this doesn't mean you have to race change. So for the choice of Mundus Stone, in many cases for stamina DPS, I would recommend the Thief Mundus Stone for extra critical chance. If your crit chance is already pretty high before picking a Mundus Stone, like around 65 or 70%, then you could go with the Shadow Mundus Stone instead for extra critical damage. Now I can't put an exact number on it, as it will depend on your exact build that you set up with, but if in doubt, I would go with Thief. Choice of food. Now this will most likely depend on your level of sustain and your HP threshold that you're comfortable running with. If you could do with a little more extra sustain and you don't feel like you need the extra HP, then lava, foot, soup and salt rice would be the way to go. If you're practicing on a target dummy, then I would also recommend selecting this food. If your sustain is decent but you need a little help with it and you need some HP as well, then I would recommend the Arteum takeaway broth, which gives the best mixture of everything useful. If you don't need any help with your sustain, then you can go with max HP, max stamina foods such as braised rabbit with spring vegetables. And this should give you the most DPS as long as you don't run out of resources. I should also mention just in case, but there is also a pure max stamina food, which gives a tiny bit more max stamina than all the previous, but nothing else. It also doesn't last as long, so for most people this is not worth it. An example of this is the Hearty Garlic Corn Chowder. Alright, so moving straight on to setup 1 with the double deal wield. We have 5 Reliquant on the body, great for single target DPS. Consider something like Sogfin as a replacement for AoE damage. Our second 5 piece is Kinraz, the new set from the Black Drake Villa dungeon. A great all around set, and I highly recommend you farm this for all of your stamina based damage dealers. On the front bar we then have the Vatashran's dual wield, where we have gone with 2 daggers. Damage poisons are being used on the front bar instead of enchants here. It's great for single target and cleave damage when you can reliably stay behind the enemy with the use of the Shrouded Daggers skill. A pretty good alternative here would be the Master's Daggers. Generally, all of these weapons are worth farming for your stamina based characters. On the back bar we then have the Black Rose Perfected Daggers, both in Infused trait, which is the best trait here. Use a Poison and Flame enchant for the best results. Again, worth farming these too if you haven't got them, and we'll talk more about these in the skill section. Here you could also use the Maelstrom Bow and replace Deadly Cloak with the Endless Hail skill. For these skills then, there will be a lot of overlap here with the other builds following this, so I won't repeat myself too much. Starting on the Vatashran Dealwood bar, the front bar, we first have Skeletal Archer. It's a summonable little guy who lasts around 16 seconds, can be cast without a target, and generally it's intelligent in hitting the nearest target, and yeah, does pretty good damage over time. Blighted Blastbones is a pretty strong AoE semi-spammable, which does damage usually within 3 seconds of casting. Therefore, whenever you can, cast this skill every 3 casts. Shrouded Daggers, it does loads of damage both for single target and with cleave with this build thanks to the Veteran Daggers. Remember, in order to get the success with this, you need to be behind the enemy if you're using this. Detonating Siphon, pretty good ground-based AoE which does damage over 12 seconds. At the end of the ability, or whenever recast, if you do decide to recast early, it does some burst damage too, which yeah, it's pretty good. Also has a passive 3% damage done, and worth noting that this skill, along with Skeletal Archer and Blast Bones, also each give an extra 10% crit chance when the enemy target is below 25%, which is one of the great passives of this class. Next we have Barb Trapped, and this is an 18-second dot which also provides minor force, which is pretty nice. Flawless Stormbreaker is our front bar ultimate and is used as a passive here in most cases. It does give weapon damage bonus from the Fighters Guild passive, as does Barb Trap. On our back bar then we have Rending Slashes, pretty decent overall 10-second dot. We then have Deadly Cloak, which we need to use to keep up the Black Rose dual buff, but we need to make sure that we're constantly hitting the enemy, as the buff itself only lasts 2 seconds. The third slot here is a passive slot. You can slot a heal or a passive ability here, whatever is useful for you in any given situation. Soul Trap is another single target dot. It costs Magicka, which is pretty nice, but scales with the highest stats. Detonating Siphon here again is double barred, and yeah, this is another passive skill. Shooting Star is our very best full damage ultimate. It does flame damage over time and also contributes to the burning status effects. A very important alternative to note is the Pestilent Colossus, which is absolutely essential in group situations for the major vulnerability debuff. So let's move on to a showcase of the Parse. As with other classes using the Veteran Daggers, the rotation does get easier as the fight goes on. I will split up the rotation roughly based on above 40% HP and below 40% HP. And this will also apply to the static rotation, which I've left in the description below, which will hopefully be fairly easy to follow. So from 100% to 40% HP, you want to make sure to cast Blast Bones every 3 skills. You want to refresh dots as and when they expire if you can, and use Shrouded Daggers in between these casts. Below 40%, you will kind of want to do the same, except you want to be dropping Soul Trap and the Blast Bones every 3 casts. Instead of these, you will replace them with Shrouded Daggers instead, since they'll be for sure stronger thanks to the Veteran Daggers. There are more precise percentages where certain skills are worth dropping, but in most real fights you won't be able to have that precision anyway. By the time we reach the low percentages, keep up your dots until you won't gain the full duration of one cast, and then replace these with even further Shrouded Dagger casts. That's really all there is to it, so enjoy the rest of this and I'll catch you at the end of the video where we can have a look at the Parse. Alright, cool. So I hope you enjoyed that and I hope it made sense. First of all, you can predictably see that Shrouded Daggers is very strong here and it makes up a large chunk of our damage. It also really helps with sustain. Meteor, also pretty decent damage as well, doing 6.3k or so DPS altogether. Blast Bones, despite only using it for just over half the fight, does really well as well. The Stamina Necromancer has a unique passive that boosts damage over time abilities as well, so altogether all of these add up pretty significantly. The top 4 blue CP slottables are Deadly Aim, Thaumaturge, Fighting Finesse and Backstabber. In the case that Backstabber isn't suitable, you could use Biting Aura or one of the slottables that give weapon or spell damage instead. If you need a more precise CP allocation guide, I've included one in the description below. Let us now move on to the second setup then. This is the one with the 2-hander on the front bar. On the body we have 5 pieces of Royal Quint as before. We are then using a monster set. Here Selene is used, but you can do equally well, if not better, with 2 crit pieces such as Slimecrawl and Grunwolf, or with Masterlock in real raid situations. We then have 5 pieces of Kinross, and this includes a precise traded greatsword on the front bar. Again, the Black Rose dual wield is on the back bar as before, so all in all, not too many changes here. Moving on to the skills, I won't say too much about the ones I've already discussed in the first setup, but anyway, let's go. On the front bar, the 2-hander skills used are Executioner, firstly, which is, as predictably described, an execute ability. It also has a Nevermorph Reverse Slice, which is pretty good for some splash cleave damage, which may come in handy in more AoE heavy situations. Anyway, this skill is worth using from roughly 30% and below, and it replaces Blast Bones at this point, as well as a main spammable, which is Wrecking Blow in this case. This is a channeled ability that also gives Empower, which is pretty nice. Note that since it is channeled, I wouldn't bar swap off this ability since you'd probably lose quite a bit of time and rotation speed with it. You can also use Venom Skull instead as an alternative spammable if you prefer. The other skills on the bar are as we've seen before, except that Barb Trap is no longer a flex spot here, but you can consider Detonating Siphon as one instead. So let's take a look at the pass. The pattern of the rotation is pretty similar to the Vital Shrine Dagger pass that we saw previously, in the sense that we have a sort of full-on rotation that uses all of these skills from 100% down to 30% this time, and from then on the rotation gets simpler. The theme here again is to cast Blast Bones as frequently as possible, so that's every 1 in 3 skills from the start whilst keeping up your dots, and in the meantime casting Wrecking Blow or whichever spammable you pick whenever there are no other dots that need to be refreshed. As always, there is going to be a simplified static rotation in the description below, which is a great place to start and to help make sense of what's going on here. Anyway, enjoy the pass. Well, as you can see, it does pretty comparable damage compared to the first setup. The Stamina Necromancer has always kind of done really well with two-hander setups since its first release, so nothing really changes here in that regard. This is mostly thanks to the Necromancer's crit chance passive in Execute, which is why we see Executioner have such a high crit chance rating, and there is no luck involved here. As you can see, the Selene proc itself did 3k damage, but as I said before, you have several other good options here for a monster set. The top 4 blue slottables are, as before, Deadly Aim, Thaumaturge, Fighting Finesse and Backstabber. Alright, now for the Bobo setup. The two sets on the body are the same as before, Kinraz and Reliquin, and again, Sogfin but also Leviathan are pretty good alternatives here. On the front bar we have the Black Rose Bow with a precise trait, with poisons equipped. When Magnum Shot is cast, it will basically leave a really strong dot on the enemy, which lasts longer the further away you are. The distance is calculated from the center of the enemy's hitbox, so against very large targets such as the Dragons in Sunspire, you can get a pretty good bonus even standing in melee range. On the back bar we have a Maelstrom Bow infused to get the most out of the enchant, which in this case is a fire one. A weapon damage enchant is also a pretty good alternative here. For the skills, as before, I won't say too much on those that have already been discussed in the first or second setups, but starting on the Black Rose Bow bar, or front bar, we firstly have Magnum Shot. This is the skill boosted by the Black Rose Bow. In order to get the effect, you must not bar swap off this skill until the arrow has hit. Easy way around this is to cast another skill on your front bar directly after casting Magnum Shot. The damage from this ability itself is average, but the Virulent Shot proc is really strong, as you'll see from the Parse. Blast Bones as before, but for a Bobo you may have to cast it 1 and 4 instead of 1 and 3 in certain situations if you are further away than usual, so be aware of that. Lethal Arrow here is our main spammable. Use it when there are absolutely no other skills that need casting. It's a channel ability, so be careful about bar swapping off it, much like Wrecking Blow. Acid Spray would also be a pretty good alternative here if you wanted a bit more cleave and not deal with a challenge ability, and in many situations I'd actually recommend doing this. Detonating Siphon and Barb Trap are as before. If you don't want to deal with casting Barb Trap since it's our only true melee skill, consider using the Sogfin set instead for the same Minor Force buff. Here we're also starting the Colossus for the Execute Crit Chance passive, since we opted to move the Archer to the back bar here. Again, it doesn't really matter, so you can switch Barb Trap to your back bar and keep Archer and Dawnbreaker on front bar like we did previously. On the back bar then, we have firstly Poison Injection, a fairly average dot above 50% but still worth casting. Below 50% there is a built-in Execute, so it does get stronger the lower the enemy HP. We then have Endless Hail, boosted by the Maelstrom Bow, so you'll want to keep this up to get the most out of that. This skill will also proc our backbar enchant if you keep it up. And the other 4 skills we've actually seen before, so I don't really have too much to say about them. Again, Detonating Siphon is our flex spot here if a heal or utility skill is required. Alright, so taking a look at the Bobo Parse then, I feel like this is another one where the class will perform better in the majority of actual content than whilst passing on the dummy. One of our limitations here is that Blast Bones can only be cast 1 in 4 skills from a certain range, so I guess you could try and figure out the sweet spot. Whereas in many real fights the hitboxes are a lot more forgiving in this regard, and when you consider the Black Rose Bow bonus as well, you can certainly see the Stamina Necromancer performing pretty well in raid situations. Again, the rotation itself is more or less casting Blast Bones as frequently as possible, keeping up various dots and then using a spammable Lethal Arrow or Acid Spray if you choose to do so the rest of the time. There is a static rotation, as always, in the description below, which basically describes this, which I hope will be a good reference point. But enjoy a pass. Alright, so looking at the Parse then, Virulent Shot did 14k DPS for us here, which is a great return for an ability altering weapon. Poison Injection 6.4k, Endless Hail 9.5k as well. Lethal Arrow per cast does appear to be 20% or so weaker than Blast Bones per cast, which is an incentive to get more Blast Bones casts in, I guess. One thing that I wish could be improved generally is just how smooth the light weaving is on the bow, so there is a lot more potential in these bow builds yet. Again, the top 4 CP slottables are Deadly Aim, Thaumaturge, Fighting Finesse and Backstabber. Consider replacing Backstabber for Biting Aura or one of the weapon and spell damage slottables in the event that you can't consistently get behind your enemies. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed the variety here for the Stamina Necromancer showcase. The wield, two-hander and bow combinations all appear to be really competent, so there's loads of choices at your disposal. Thanks again to Luca for the footage, and if you enjoyed this video please do like and subscribe to our channels. If you're looking for something similar for a different class, then do check in the description below for my other videos. Luca has also uploaded a bunch as well. Anyway, this is Liko, stay safe and have a good day.